and Einstein's happiest thought convinces him that it is essential. Second, Einstein uses physical reasoning to make sure that any new equations make sense. Most importantly, they have got to reduce to the equations of Isaac Newton in ordinary situations like tossing a rock or the motion of the moon, situations in which Newton's ideas had already received a couple hundred years of observational support. And as we turn the pages of the notebook, we see that these two tracks are converging. Einstein is hot on the trail of the general theory of relativity. And I gotta tell you, when I read these pages as a physicist, even though I kind of know how it all turns out, I can't help but cheer Einstein on. I mean, go, Einstein, you're almost there. And then with the prize just coming into his grasp, he stumbles in trying to extract Newton's gravitational equations from his own. Einstein makes a technical assumption. It's over here, page 42. Now, of course, you don't have to know what this symbol means, but this represents an assumption about the shape of the environment outside a spherical body like the Earth. And it's wrong. And with that mistake, Einstein cannot get the mathematics to work out. So what to do? Well, Einstein, he regroups, he fights back. He comes up with all sorts of mathematical modifications, clever manipulations, but in the end, nothing will work. Einstein throws up his hands. Moment of utter despair. He thinks that perhaps for all these years he's been barking up the wrong tree. Now, others in this situation would plain give up, but not Einstein. He keeps focused. He gets together with Marcel Grossman, and the two of them come up with a new strategy for describing gravity, a strategy, and this is important, in which Einstein retreats from his happiest thoughts. He gives up on finding equations that will work equally well for you, me, someone who's wildly moving. In 1913, the two of them publish this idea. And it's this paper right here that marks the opening stride of 2 long years of wandering in the dark. Because only after Einstein had seen this approach through and realized that it did not work, would he finally be ready to get back on track toward the general theory of relativity. But by then, the playing field would no longer be just his. Einstein's big job offer comes in July of 1913. Max Planck and Walter Nernst, these were giants of German science. They visit Einstein and make him an offer he cannot refuse. Move to Berlin, head up a new Institute of Physics, and become the youngest person ever to be inducted into the Prussian Academy of Sciences. In the spring of 1914, Einstein makes the move, and in Berlin, he continues to develop the idea that he and Grossman had published. He begins to see possible fractures in the foundation of this new approach, but by June of 1915, he is still sufficiently confident to accept an invitation from the University of Göttingen to give a week-long series of lectures on his ideas. And in the audience for those lectures is the renowned mathematician David Hilbert. And Einstein's discussions with Hilbert, well, they please him no end.
I was able to convince Hilbert of the general theory of relativity. He is a man of astonishing energy and independence. I am quite enchanted with Hilbert.
Early 20th century bromance. But then things take a sharp turn. In October of 1915, Einstein realizes that he made a mistake in an earlier and pivotal calculation that completely and totally undermines his confidence in the approach that he and Grossman had published. 2 long, fruitless years. It finally convinces Einstein that he should not and he could not abandon his happiest thought, that it is absolutely imperative that any new accommodations of all perspectives, whether sitting still or freely falling or wildly moving, and so Einstein returns to the ideas that he had been developing toward the end of the Zurich notebook. Now, far greater facility with the mathematical methods. And as Einstein combines and recombines the metric and curvature tensors handed down to him by the deans of 19th century geometry, he reports on his progress in a series of lectures at the Prussian Academy. It's now Thursday, November 4, 1915.
For the last 4 years, I have tried to establish a general theory of relativity on the assumption of the relativity of even non-uniform motion. Yeah, I actually believed that I had discovered the only law of gravitation which was in line with a logically conceived general postulate of relativity.
Einstein then describes the problems that beset his approach with Grossman and the impact it had on his perspective.
For that reason, I completely lost trust in the field equations, and thus I went back to the requirement of a more general covariance.
That's the technical term for equations that work regardless of how you are moving.
Which I had abandoned only with a heavy heart. Back then we had, in fact, already come quite close to the solution.
Einstein concludes the lecture with equations that are tantalizingly close to fitting the bill, but he's not quite there and he knows it. And he pursues the math with the intensity of a lion stalking its prey. He writes to his son that he's so engrossed in his calculations that he sometimes forgets to eat. Now, in the midst of this intense intellectual focus, word trickles down to Einstein that David Hilbert has also found the flaws in Einstein's paper with Grossman and is throwing his hat into the ring seeking the correct resolution. Out of left field, Einstein realizes that there's a chance he might get scooped. Bromance on the rocks. Einstein immediately writes to Hilbert and lets him know that he'd already found those flaws and backs up the claim by sending Hilbert a copy of the presentation that he'd given a few days earlier at the Prussian Academy.
With return post, I am sending you the correction to a paper in which I changed the gravitation equations after having myself noticed about 4 weeks ago that my method of proof was a fallacious one. My colleague Sommerfeld tells me you also have found a hair in my soup that has spoiled it entirely for you. I'm curious whether you will take kindly to this new solution.